Greetings! As you can probably tell, I'm quite excited for the upcoming 250th anniversary of our nation's independence. Now, not only are we coming up on 250, but it is currently February, which means it's Black History Month. So I've decided to combine the two and talk about a black patriot. However, before we get into the whole independence talk, we should circle back to the fighting beginning. Because remember, the fighting began before we decided we were shooting for independence. At first, we were merely fighting to preserve the natural-born rights of Englishmen. Now, these rights date back to the Magna Carta, where the barons demanded rights from the king. However, eventually those were expanded to more landholding men. These rights were then affirmed post-Glorious Revolution. And landed men, of which Benjamin Estabrook of Lexington was one, were guaranteed certain rights. The Estabrook family actually goes all the way back to 1660, first landing in Massachusetts. Benjamin had land and 9 children, none of which died during infancy, which is good on his part. Beating the odds there. He also had a slave named Prince. Being a freeman between the ages of 16 and 60, he was a member of Captain Parker's Lexington Militia Company, meaning on the morning of April 19th, 1775, he was on Lexington Green with his slave, Prince Estabrook. I should point out that Prince Estabrook was not a member of the militia, as Indians and Negroes were barred from joining the militia, as they also functioned as social clubs. You get together with the boys, you talk to each other, you shoot your guns a bit, you march around, and then you start drinking. And when I say drinking, I mean drinking. The average daily consumption of a colonist at the time of the American Revolution was 7 shots a day. And remember, that's an average, and men were doing most of the drinking. That accounts for women and children included, who were drinking far less than the grown men, meaning people were constantly plastered. Actually, you know what? That's making me want to drink too. I just did dry January, and I have some cider here that I brewed myself. You know, getting into the colonial spirit. So while I enjoy this refreshing home-brewed cider, why don't you guys watch an ad? This video is brought to you by Bennett Farm Maple. That's right, my family's sugaring operation. Now, there's been a lot of talk about tariffs lately, and a lot of people have been saying, bum up maple syrup. Well, guess what? Maple syrup's also made right here in America. #1 state for syrup production, Vermont. That's where our operation is. We are pumping out syrup, or we will be in about a month. For now, we're tapping. But you know what? You want some wonderful American syrup that's not going to get tariffed? Go to Bennett Farm Maple. In fact, in honor of the 250th coming up, we will have patriotic pints available soon. They're not canned yet, so when you do get it, it will be fresh, fresh, fresh. That really hits the spot. Just like Bennett Farm Maple hits the spot. Go to www.bennettfarmmaple.com and order yours today. Anyway, while on average slaves in northern colonies were treated far better than those in southern colonies already at the time of the American Revolution, the average masshole still wasn't exactly going to be chummy with even a free black man. There was abolitionist sentiments in the area, but they were still pretty racist. So keep in mind, The argument for the beginning of the American Revolution was whether the rights of free-born Englishmen follow them to the ends of the earth. Prince Estabrook was neither freeborn nor an Englishman. Benjamin Estabrook did, however, own more than one firelock, as every American should. I too own a musket for home defense, just as the Founding Fathers intended. He owned more than one firelock, and thus he armed his slave, especially knowing how outnumbered the Lexington Company would be. While standing beside his master on the morning of April 19th, 1775, that Prince was shot in the left shoulder, making him the first black casualty of the American Revolutionary War. Of the approximately 80 men on Lexington Green on the American side that morning, 8 were killed, 10 were wounded. 1 British regular was wounded in Lexington. And I'll remind you, Captain Parker was a veteran of the French and Indian War. All the sergeants in the militia were veterans. Most of the British troops were fresh recruits, the average age being 23. They had not seen combat in the French and Indian War compared to multiple veterans in the Lexington Militia Company. The British shot first. That's my hot take on the controversy of the shot heard around the world. Anyway, the colonists had a rough start to that morning. However, they'd have their vengeance by the end of the day. But this video isn't about Battle Road. This video is here so I can rant about a single man. A man who did recover from his wounds, and by June the same year would be serving once again alongside his master in the Siege of Boston. During that siege on June 17th, the day of the Battle of Bunker Hill, yes, Bunker, not Breeds. The name Breeds Hill didn't come about till after the battle. At the time of the battle, men on the ground were calling it Bunker Hill. In fact, the British map only uses the term bunker, and it sees them as 2 separate peaks of the same hill. That was a bit of a tangent. Anyway, Prince Estabrook actually wasn't there at the battle that day. Instead of being in Charleston, where the battle was, he was in Cambridge, where the headquarters were, on guard duty with his master. In fact, the entire Lexington Militia Company were there, meaning they didn't see action that day. Speaking of action, on May 10th, 1775, Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, Vermont represent, captured Fort Ticonderoga. However, after all the rum was gone, which, remember the drinking bit? Yeah. These were backwoodsmen. They drank even harder, especially when it was free. But then they realized, I have chores to do back at home. The whole reason I'm doing this is so that I can just kind of homestead. I don't want to be in a fort. Garrison duty's boring. My family isn't here, and I'm not getting things done on the farm. I want to go back to the farm. We're also going to ignore the fact that some of the Green Mountain Boys decided to go up from Ticonderoga up into Quebec and forget about how poorly that went for them. So they ended up sending up Massachusetts and Connecticut men to garrison Ticonderoga. 2 of those men being Prince and Benjamin Estabrook. At this point, I'd like to mention, over the course of the Revolutionary War, 5,000 black men served on the American side, both free and enslaved. In fact, the Continental Army was the most integrated an American army would be until post-World War II. The Korean War was the first war in which the American army was as integrated as it was in the Revolutionary War. Now, from mid-August to late November 1776, they were at Ticonderoga. This marked the end of service for Benjamin. Being 47 and having done his bit, he went home. He did, however, continue to offer something to the cause, his slave. And after all, Prince was about a decade younger than him, so Prince was either born in 1740 or 1741, compared to Benjamin, who was born 1729, meaning Prince was at least a decade younger. Benjamin was 47 and wanted to be home, and I gotta say, he'd done his bit. He was there at the very beginning, did his bit, and now he's sending his slave. Although, to clarify, Prince might have no longer been his slave. He may have been manumitted to serve. It's not exactly clear at what point Prince got his freedom. But he was no longer serving alongside his master, so even at that point, even if he wasn't technically freed yet, he had more freedom, but not really, because now the army owned him. What is clear is that by the end of the war, he was a freeman. If he'd not been manumitted by Benjamin by the year 1781, then he was freed in theory by the passing of the 1780 Massachusetts Constitution, which stated, quote, "All men are born free and equal," unquote. And if not in theory, then in fact, by the Massachusetts courts and the it's weird name, the Walker cases, or the Jennison cases. By the end of the Jennison cases, Commonwealth v. Jennison, Chief Justice William Cushing ruled in part, and I quote, "The idea of slavery is inconsistent with our own conduct and Constitution, and there can be no such thing as perpetual servitude of a rational creature." Unquote. On the eve of the American Revolution, there were slightly over 5,000 slaves in Massachusetts. By the time of the first American census in 1790, there were 0 slaves in Massachusetts. That same census also informs us that Prince was still part of the Estabrook household. He is listed as a non-white freeman. In 1803, Benjamin Estabrook died, and Prince, being close to the family, chose to work for Benjamin's second youngest son, Nathan. Nathan then moved from Lexington to Ashby in 1805, and not much else is known about Prince Estabrook besides that he worked for Nathan for a bit. It's not known if he actually retired or if he worked till his death, which was in 1830, making him approximately 90 years old. At this point, I just want to do another shout out to Vermont. I know we mentioned Massachusetts abolishing slavery. Vermont's Constitution, when it was a republic, banned slavery, although not immediately. You had some leeway until your male slave was 21 or female slave was 18. However, that meant that you'd have less than a generation more slaves and they'd be done. However, post 1793 and then reaffirmed post 1850 with both Fugitive Slave Acts, there were at certain points after that slaves in Vermont, because the ruling was if a Southern slave escapes, until they've gotten to Canada, they can be captured and brought down south. So Vermont, as a state, did not have slavery. However, there were slaves in the state of Vermont due to federal law. On that happy note, I hope everyone's ready for 250, and I hope everyone remembers the great accomplishments that all Americans have given, the great sacrifices all Americans have made, and that we come together as a nation. Also, ignore the FARB. I know I'm getting my uniform together. Green Mountain signing off.